All right, good morning. As we start today, I would like you to please open up a browser window, and I'd like you to go out to here. Can you all read that okay from where we are? You see that okay, Nick? Okay. Don't hit enter, or I just put that in there and hit enter. And I don't think you need, again, the HTTPS. Probably that's sufficient right there. Now, if you put it in correctly, hopefully at least your screen looks like mine does underneath here. All right. And if that's where you are, just stop. Anybody have any problems with that? Is that what everyone's screen looks like now? All right. Then what I'd like you to do is there's a green button here that says code. And I'd like you to click that button. And I'm not going to do it because I already have several copies of this. But I'd like you to click the download zip. And it will download it into your downloads folder typically. You know, if you're using Chrome, it'll typically stick it into your downloads folder. It may take some time. It may not take that much time. And don't worry about it if it does seem to take a lot of time. All right. Any questions on that? Any problems with that? Anybody? All right. So let me show you basically what's in there. Okay. All right. The semester is in there. That's pretty much what's in there. Okay. So there are several folders that are in here. You can take a look at them once you get them. The Git folder is how I put that thing out on GitHub. Does that make sense? We're going to go over that today. I'm going to probably go through chapter 6 fairly quickly. And believe it or not, a lot of the stuff in 7 we've already covered. So hopefully, you know, what I'm hoping we're going to get to do today is to create our first site as a class. It's not going to be anything fantastic or anything like that, but it'll just get us started. Okay? So eventually, we're going to get into Bootstrap here. And in there are some Bootstrap examples. So you'll notice, for example, here's one that says Jumbotron. That's a Jumbotron right there. And don't worry about what it is. We're going to talk about it. It's not that big a thing one way or the other, but there are some examples. And then there are some slides, and these slides, I believe, were all made by Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith is an unbelievably good instructor, and he's very thorough, and he's unbelievably smart, too. All right. So that's the Bootstrap stuff. Then we've got docs. And these are some handouts. Most of them are one page. I think the one on JavaScript is longer, but most of them are just a page on whatever topic that's about. All right. Look at that at your leisure if you want to. Here's some examples. We'll get into those, but not today. All right. So this is your homework. And you look at this and you go, what the heck? Well, the one thing about this, notice chapter 1 homework, chapter 2 homework. Each one of them has got a blank index.html file. This is where you are supposed to put your homework, is in each one of these things. Not only that, you have homework and you have labs. Here's the stuff for your labs. Not only that, here are your tests. Now, they're all blank documents that are in there, but this is where you will put the stuff. All right? So we're going to practice with this, not this second, but we're going to practice because I want to make sure everybody understands exactly what it is you're supposed to be doing. That makes sense? All right. Go back, what? Sure. That? This is virtually exactly the same as the one they're getting in St. Louis, except the one in St. Louis says EA Gudmested because that's Evans that he put out there. He didn't put fall 2021, and I massaged it a little bit. And what I mean is it's the same material, but I moved some of the stuff around. I didn't like where he had things placed. All right, it's no slam on him. It's just that he places things where he does, I do where I do. All right. The other stuff that's in there, you'll notice that it says written tests. All right. Well, after today, we'll have gone over the first 7 chapters of the book. And really, after tomorrow, the first 8 chapters of the book. So we're only really going to cover in here, just so you're aware of this, the only things we're going to cover in depth, so to speak, are the first 16 chapters. So wow, in a week we're half done. We are going to do 17, 18, 19, and 20, but I'll do those over 1 or 2 class periods. There'll be no homework, there'll be no test, or anything like that. You with me? All right. Now, with these written tests, just so you see them, with these written tests, you'll notice it's broken up into 2 folders. Muroc HTML CSS, which is the book we're on right now, and Muroc JavaScript jQuery. Again, I put in tests through the 18 chapters. There won't be tests on 17 and 18. They're there, but don't worry about them. And just to show you, because a couple of you have told me that you're not the best spellers in the world. So as I said, these tests, notice they're all multiple choice. So your first true assignment will be that by a week from tomorrow, so a week from tomorrow will be what? It's September 3rd, I think, something like that. So on September 3rd, we will be going over these first tests. Now, so like I said, the idea behind this was just to show you what you should have now is all this material. The get ignored, don't worry about it. Basically, those are just the files that when you push up to GitHub don't have to go. That's all. All right. And the license and README were just created. I didn't create those. There might be something in the README. I don't know if there is or not. There it is. Wow. Okay, so that's it. So, not today, but very soon, what we will do is I'm going to look at it. We might even do it tomorrow. I'm going to look at Lab 1 and I'm going to look at Homework 1, and one or the other we'll do as a class. All right? And I'm going to send you this, so don't worry about writing it down, but somewhere in here, there it is. Let me get rid of this. All right, I know it's a little hard to read. I'll make it bigger. All right. I'd like everybody to do this right now. And what I mean is this. I'd like you to go and where it says type here to search, hopefully you've all got one of those in the bottom left-hand corner. All you have to do is type into that box CMD. And and when you hit enter, it should bring up a command prompt like this. Should do that. Anybody have any problems with that? All right. Then I would like you to type in this command, git --version, and hit enter. Now I'm making it bigger, so hopefully everybody can see it okay. If yours doesn't say this, it should say something similar to this. If it comes back and says bad command or not found, that probably means you didn't load Git. We did this the first day. This is not GitHub. Git is what you work on your machine. GitHub is the cloud to which you push your Git stuff. All right, I'm being very general, very generic here, but just so you know that. All right, now you guys, unless you upgrade it, you don't have to do the next thing we're going to do, but you can because it doesn't hurt anything. All right. So I want you to realize one thing. If you look up on the screen, please. Do you all know where your numeric keypad is on the right-hand side of your screen? Everybody know where that is? I'm not talking about the numbers that are there, but you have a thing that says numlock and you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm not sure what your keyboards are like, so, all right. But next to that, to the right, hopefully you've got some arrow keys right under your shift key, and you've got an up arrow and a down arrow. You all see what I mean, right? I'm not trying to talk down to you. I want you to know that, because I've done this already. People are like, we're not idiots. No, none of you are idiots, but I just want to make sure we're on the same page. If you hit your up arrow key, it works with what's called DOS key. So it'll bring up the last command. You don't have to run it again. I'm just telling you, let's say that I spelled version wrong. So I could bring it back up, and then you can hit your left and right arrow keys, and you can move back and forth in here. Sometimes that can be handy for people. All right? Okay, so the next thing I want you to do, all these git commands are prefaced with the word git. Okay? I want you to type in this, git config -- global user.name, then in double quotes, please don't put my name, put your name in there. Don't put Jeff Scott in there. Put Nick Kottner or Nicholas Kottner or whatever you want to put in there. All right? That's associating your name with Git. All right, I've already done it, but it doesn't hurt anything. I can do it again. If it comes back and just gives you your prompt back, guess what? You did it correctly. All right, now the next command is similar, so I am going to use my up arrow, but instead of user.name, I want to put in here, so I'm just hitting the backspace key, user.email. Please, in here, please use your Rankin email address. Did you all hear me? If you got a Gmail or something, don't use that. It's going to make my life easier when you invite me to be able to see your work. All right? So again, I'll put jpscott@rankin.edu. Okay? Just like that. And I'm going to hit enter. Again, all I get back is that. You should, unless you upgrade Git, you should only have to do that once. You don't have to do this every time you log in. It should be set now. All right? All right. Now, I'm not going to do this, but I want to explain these commands. Don't type these in. I just want to show you these. We will actually do this a little bit later. What we're going to do is we're going to create a very simple website. We're going to put a picture or two in it and some text. I've already got the text and I've sent it to you already. So there's not going to be that much work that you have to do. But when we do it, we're going to build what's referred to as a GitHub repository out on github.com to hold our work. Once we do that, we're going to come back in here and we're going to put in these commands. So don't worry about any of them right now. All right? I just want you to see where we're going. All right? And by the end of the period then, we should hopefully have our first website created. Again, it's not going to be much. If you don't like the colors, when I give you a color, put in your own color. You're not turning it in. Believe me, when you have an assignment, I'll let you know what it is, and I will expect you to follow that. But if we're doing something as a class and man, I hate that font, then use a different one. Right? It's totally fine. All right. So I'm taking for granted that everybody got that to work okay. And if you didn't, then just see me during the break. All right? All right. So I'm going to then jump into, that wasn't too bad, it was 14.
You want to close out of that?
Yeah, thank you. To close out of there, where you are from right here, just type in the word exit and hit enter. And that closes it. Thank you. All right. So with that, I'm going to jump into Chapter 6. How to use CSS for page layout. I will tell you, please, when you start going through this, we're going to talk floats again. But after we do, don't worry about memorizing this stuff. All right? So it says, in this chapter, you'll learn how to use CSS to control page layout. And one of the main things they're going to talk about in here, let me get rid of that. one of the main things they're going to talk about in here at different times is going to be fixed width layout versus fluid layout. Fixed width is designed, it used to be back in the olden days, like in the 90s, before really, cell phones became the rage, so to speak, almost everything was fixed. And you set it up for basically a laptop or a desktop. Not like that so much anymore. Today, you want a more fluid type of layout. So notice we're going to talk about columnar layouts, and we'll talk about 2-column and 3-column. And then they will give you examples of each. All right. Then they will talk about how to use CSS3 to create text columns. Finally, they will end up with the 4 basic ways that you can position things on a page. All right. And there'll be things, for example, like fixed positioning. So notice that, if I don't want this thing to move, for example, this thing that you see right here, all right, you see how it's not moving, even though the page is moving? I can fix it in a position, for example. All right, so that's the kind of thing that we're going to look at. Now, one thing that I did, the first test that you take will be next week, but I'm looking now probably, like I think I told you, on Tuesday to give you that test. All right, and we're going to practice today. We're going to practice tomorrow. And then Monday, when you come in here, I'm going to give you a practice test. You will not turn it in. You will not turn in anything we do today, tomorrow, or Monday. They're designed to help you. If you come in here on Tuesday and you take this test and you're done in 45 minutes and you're like, what the hell? Seems too flippin' easy. That's good. Then I'm doing my job. All right. If you take it and you take all 4 hours and you're like, I don't have a clue as to what I'm doing, then I'm failing you. So I will have to know that. I have had 2 of my second-year students, Gabriel Breeding, Gabriel's a good guy, and Angie Shelton, she's graduating in December. They have both volunteered to tutor. So as we're going through this stuff, if you think I'm falling behind, I don't want to, or you're working on the first assignment, you're like, I just don't get this stuff, let me know. All right, even if you send me an email, that's fine. I will hook you up with them. All right, and to my knowledge, I'll have to ask them both. One or both of them probably would be available to come in during class time. They get paid for that, and I think I told you that. It's not a ton, it's $10 an hour, and there's no charge to you guys, nothing. The school provides that as a service. Now, probably, let's just assume for a second, all 3 of you new people, you want a tutor. I'm not saying you do, but we're going to pretend you do. Probably I'd only bring one of them in and have them tutor all 3 of you at once. You see what I'm saying? Now, if it turns out that somebody does need one-on-one help, we'll work that out. Either we'll bring somebody in like that, or they'll work with you online. And if none of you need help, that's fine too. All right? Okay. So let's jump into this. To create a page layout with 2 or 3 columns, you can float elements that make up the columns of the page. Again, what does that mean? It means you want to lay things out. What we will get into at the end of next week is we're going to take the website that we're going to create today, and we're going to align stuff up using both Flexbox and CSS Grid. Because after we get done with these chapters, the plan at least is Wednesday when you come in here, if we take the test Tuesday, I believe we will, then it's my job to try to grade it Tuesday night. If I can't, then I'll grade it Wednesday night, but you'll have it back by Thursday. I'll tell you that for sure. And hopefully you'll have it back on Wednesday. If you do, I'll go through the test and show you what I was looking for. Now, if it turns out that we have 5 people who take the test and 5 people get 100, I'm not going to spend much time going through it because that would be silly to do that. All right. But then Wednesday and Thursday of next week, we will go over Chapter 9, which is on CSS Flexbox, and Chapter 10, which is on CSS Grid. Then on Friday of next week, we're both going to go over those tests as I mentioned, the written ones, and we're going to go and take a look at this website that we're going to create today, and we're going to talk about how to make it look better using first what are called media queries, and then in conjunction with those, Flexbox and Grid. All right. And then the week after that, so that's the week of the 6th, remember, Monday there's no class. What I don't like to do, if I can help it at least, is I don't like it if you get a 3-day weekend, well, Tuesday will be a test. Because I don't want anybody to say, yeah, you screwed up my weekend, thanks a lot. All right. So we probably would have a test if we're ready for it then, and we'll see. It'll be towards the end of the week. It might be Wednesday, it might be Thursday, it might be that Friday. I'm not that concerned. All right. Then after that, we're going to jump in and we're going to do the next part of the book, which is like chapters 11 to 16. We'll just do all those chapters. All right. And so we're going to have a test on chapters. It's either going to be 1 through 3 or 1 through 4. All right. Then we're going to have another one basically on like 4 to 8. And then another one on 9 and 10. And then one last one. So there'll be 4. And I'm not talking written tests. These are typically called HOTS, hands-on test. You can use anything you want. But again, I do walk around a little bit. Mr. Corrigan has told me, walk around more than you do. He said, you got to trust people, and that's what I do. He has done that, and he has found people who, what he does in there, and I don't want you to do it either, is I don't want your phones on. I mean, they can be on, but just silence them. He has had people in the past who have done things like texted friends, etc. And of course, you're not supposed to do that. All right. So, how to float and clear elements. We've talked about this a little bit already. It says by default, block elements flow from the top to the bottom. And they go from left to right. Now, that's in this language because we're using English. All right. Inline elements flow from the left to the right. So when you float in here, and what they say is you're taking things out of its natural order. All right. And there are different ways of doing this. So it says here, Figure 6.1 presents the basic skills for floating something on a web page. So let's take a look at that, and we'll bounce back if we have to. All right. So, as it says there, float's a keyword, and you float to the left, you float to the right, or you don't float at all. The default is none, which means, again, set it up without any floating. If you are floating, so if you've set float left, everything will continue to float left until you clear it. All right? So they've got an example here. Now, this is a little different from what you've seen before, but I want to show it to you anyway. Now, one of you asked me yesterday about main, and I will tell you, I don't like the way this page is set up right here. I was always taught that if you're going to use a main, it should appear, if in your body, let's say you've got a nav and a header, those should be at the top. Then there should be a main. I would have put this inside of the main. That's the way I do things. And what's an aside? I've given these kinds of examples before. I'm taking for granted, even if you haven't looked at a newspaper in a long time, you at least know how a newspaper is set up. All right. So let's just pretend for a second that this was my newspaper. All right. And right here, there was an article at the top of the page. 3 kids injured in fire. Heroic neighbor saves them and dog. So there's a big article that's right here. And it just so happens that that person actually did this once before. They saved somebody else before. So you got a story over here on the side just about them. So it's related, but you could have had the whole article without that. That's the kind of thing you typically use for an aside. All right. But since it's part of the main area, I would have put it in there. There's nothing wrong with what they did. And there, as far as if you said to me, okay, when we start to get into this, what's the difference between a section and an article? I was always taught a section is like a section of a paper or a section of a magazine, and the articles are what go inside of that section. Some people do it the other way. So there's no universal agreement on how to use this stuff is what I'm telling you. Whether that's right, wrong, fair, not fair, doesn't matter. So this is our HTML. They're not going to show you here all the stuff at the top, with a doc type and everything else. They're not showing that here. All right. This is what's inside of the body. So here's the CSS that they put in here. All right. So who cares? Well, take a look at what they have in here. This aside, they have told to float to the right. This is the aside right here. And you can see how it's set up. All right. When you get to the footer, if you didn't do this, this would try to float to the right. So by putting in that clear both, if I have floated left or if I have floated right, it will take the clears away. Does that make sense to everybody? Floats are in some ways, at least, they're still being used today. But they are highly discouraged in new development because once you see Flexbox and Grid, they're much easier to use. All right. Now, once we get into Flexbox and we get into Grid, one of you might raise your hand and go, you're wrong, they're not easier to use. And the reason they're not is floats, there's just float left, float right, and clear. That's all there is. There's a lot more things you can do with Flexbox and Grid. That's why you might say, no, they're harder. You don't have to memorize them. Again, you have to know where to go if you're having problems with something. And we'll do some exercises as a class that hopefully will help with that. So when you look at this, let's take a look at everything that's here. So we're assuming this is 500 pixels, this right here. All right. The main, the aside, and the footer, we have removed all margin. We have removed all top and bottom padding. We have added left and right padding. So that you can see over here, and that you can see over here. And you can say, well, why isn't that even with that? Let's keep looking. All right. The aside, we actually added some margin. Remember what the margin is? That's the thing between this and this, so they don't bump into one another. So that margin, we've got 0 here and 20 here and 10 here. I think the 20 is this and the 10 is this, or vice versa. I don't know. It's not really important. But what we're doing is we're adding our own CSS in here. The width is 150 pixels. Since our whole width is 500 pixels, all right, it's using 150 of it plus margin and padding that we're adding. All right. We are telling it to float to the right because if we didn't put that in by default, since this is put in here as a main, that's what this is, and even though this is above it, all right, I would think at least if we left that off, this would appear up on top of that. Does that make sense to you? All right, but we've told it to float, and that's why it's floating. All right, then we put a border around it. Notice it's a 1 pixel solid black, and when we get to the footer, we're telling it to clear it. Now, I don't want to sit and read this stuff to you, so take a quick look at what's there under the description. And you'll notice when you look there, it says, when you use the float property for an element, you also need to set its width. It needs to know where it should go, how it should go, etc. So what if I don't? You're going to have, your results are not going to be what you want. How's that? Again, to stop the floating, use the clear property. Okay. So, how to use floating in a 2-column fixed format layout. All right. So this next thing that's in here shows this. This is a 2-column layout. Now, they call that a side. It doesn't have to be a side. It could be anything. All right. You'll notice that the header, in this case, basically, other than margin and padding that we've got on the ends, okay, the header takes up the whole area, so does the footer. There can be anything in the header. It could be centered. There can be anything in the footer. It could be centered. That's not what's important here. What's important is the fact that we got 2 columns. Now, when you look at these, it looks like, to me at least, like this one is maybe 60-40 or 70-30, whatever it is. Doesn't have to be. It could be 50-50. You typically don't see the main content smaller than the other columns, but even that's possible. Maybe this is a big picture that you want to show or something like that. Again, as you probably guess, it all depends on the content. So let's see what they have to say. I back it up. So it says in CSS, you can see that the width is set for the body, the aside elements. All right. And they've also mentioned here, it says the right border is 2 pixels and neither main or aside have margins or padding. So what they're talking about here is you can figure out your exact width by doing this. Now, 962 pixels, that's fine. But guess what? That's wider than a phone is. That's about twice the width of portrait on a phone. All right, I don't know what you'd call that then. So instead of this, it's like this. Whatever, it doesn't matter. All right. So it says after you set up the widths, you create the columns by floating the main element. We'll look at that in a minute. And then they say another alternative, because there's always more than one way of doing this. The best thing I can tell you is when you start doing this is you play around with it. And sometimes when you play around with it, weird stuff is going to happen. What do I mean? Hey, Jeff, I don't know how this happened, but my footer is now at the top of my document. You can probably figure out what the problem is. All right. So again, when you take a look in here, there's not much body. All right. There's a header section, there's a main section, there's an aside, and there's a footer. Why? Because there's 4 of these. All right. Then we've got the CSS. Now, what I need you to do is to start looking at this stuff and in your mind, try to figure out it yourselves what's happening here. You see we've got a universal selector that's turning off margin and padding. You can see for the body, which means the whole document, we're setting a width and a background color. And we're telling it that what we want is we want a top and bottom margin of 15 pixels, which is really almost 1 rem. All right. And we want it to be centered. And we want a border around the whole thing, which is solid black. That's the border here. Might not be that easy to tell that that's a border that's solid black, but that's what it is. Then you've got your H2, which just has padding. Your header, which has a bottom border. That's this right here. All right. Then main, and you'll notice that main has got a certain width. It's floated to the left. It's got a height, and it's got a border right. That's this thing right there. All right. Then you've got the aside, which has just got what? A width and a float. Well, we floated this to the left, so by default, everything that follows it is going to try to move way over to the left. Since we want the aside to be way on the right, we float that to the right. Then when we get down to the footer, we don't want it to float anymore. So we have to turn the floating off by doing a clear both. And then you'll notice here, we've got a border top, and that's this. Now, I'm not saying that was a fantastic explanation, but what I am saying is, after seeing that, you should at least be able to understand what's happening in there. All right? Now, that was a fixed layout because you gave a number of pixels, 962 pixels. What does that mean? It means that when you go in and you start shrinking the width of your browser, see how when you do it here, even though I realize it's hard to read, but it still is basically set up the way you would think it would be? Well, you weren't going to have that with that example. All right? And I should mention, I didn't, but I should mention that in this stuff that I had you download, that you've got Muroc from the book. This is every app and example that's in the book. You now have them. You don't have to type in anything. So you could come in here and find book example, chapter 6, and float clear 2 column fixed. There it is. And again, notice, like I said, when you make this smaller, this Oops. This is not responsive. See that? We will learn in Chapter 8 how to take something like this and make it responsive. All right? Okay. Now, what we just looked at was fixed. What we're going to look at now is fluid. Notice what it says here. The key to creating a fluid layout is to use percentages for widths, because it's the percentage of your viewport. And your viewport is whatever you're using to look at it. So it's supposed to adapt, all right, to what you're working with. Now, when we look at this example, and let's look at it, doesn't look that much different, does it? But take a look when I come in here, and this is where is it? That's a fix. Maybe they don't even show that one. I don't know. Well, let's look at this one. I don't know if this is it or not. See what's happening? I mean, that should be unbelievably obvious to you. Now, just by setting percentages, you get a lot of benefits. Okay? You don't get total benefits. All right? There's still a few things that you're going to want to do. Plus, sometimes when you take a website and you get to what are called these breakpoints, oh, it looks really good. It doesn't look that good, but it still looks okay. It looks really crummy. And once you get to that, doesn't look that good, you want to start making it look better, right? So it looks good at all sizes. That's what we're going to get into in Chapter 8. All right. And again, I'm not going to go through these other than to say, take a look at what's in yellow, and you'll notice that by and large, the stuff that's in there is using percentages. It's not using pixel values. Pixels, again, remember, pixels and points are fixed measurements. Percentages and rems and ems are relative measurements, rather. But in here, when you want to be working with size, we're not even going to be using rems. You're going to be using percentages, because it's the percentage of the viewport that you're using. All right? Now, notice, the benefit of this is that the size of the page is adjusted based on the size of the browser. The disadvantage is changing the size of the columns may affect the typography or the appearance of the page. When you start making it smaller, maybe you've got this really cool image that's in there, and you've got to make sure you scale it okay. All right, because otherwise it may look bad. All right, if you remember this from yesterday, or the other day, I think it was yesterday, where is it? No, not there. There. Okay, I know how small that is. That's that picture of the puppy. I can make it bigger so I can see it. That doesn't look very nice. It's pixelated right now. Images typically aren't going to be pixelated, but they can look skewed as far as their height, their width, etc., or both. So then they move from a 2-column to a 3-column. And you'll notice to start with, it's 3-column fixed. So we're back again, and we're back to using fixed width, pixels. All right, so what have they done here? They've added another sidebar. Okay, and I will tell you, if you go out to a website, rankin.edu, okay, what's in vogue today is to take your navigation and put it up on the top and make it horizontal like that. It wasn't very long ago you didn't see it like that. Everything was off to the left and it was vertical. There may be a very good reason, and many websites do this. So again, there may be a very good reason to split it up like this. So all they've done is add another sidebar. So when we look, the key here is not this. The key is to look at the CSS. You'll notice that sidebar A is floated to the left. The main is floated left, and the sidebar B is floated right. Well, you might, why is that? Okay, I get this and I get this, but why is that floated left? Since this is floated left, if we didn't float this to the left, it would go underneath it, and it would be pushed off to the left. And so with this, if we didn't float that. So we float this left and we float this left, so they're right next to one another. All right. Now, if we don't float this, it's going to go right underneath the sidebar A. So we float that to the right. That's one of the reasons, I mean, I've talked with experienced developers who tell me I hate floats. It's not that there's much that you have to key in, but it's remembering how to set them, how to set your widths appropriately, etc. And that's why most of them, by and large, like the new stuff a lot better. All right, the stuff that we're going to be learning next week. All right, so again, we're back to pixels. As it says, the first aside is floated to the left, main is floated left, and the second aside is floated to the right. Notice, you could get the same result by floating both asides and the main content to the left. And what they're saying is, try it. There's a bunch of different ways you can make the same thing happen. All right? So, 2 web pages that use a 2-column fixed width layout. Fixed width. All right? So there's the first one. You've seen this one before. They've been using this one before. You'll notice you can tell what the 2 columns are. All right? And they've used color here to delineate where one column starts and the other one ends, etc. Now, you may or may not like their choice of colors or whatever, but I think you'd all agree it is broken up into 2 different sections. All right? And if we do take a look at the HTML for it, it won't look that different from things we've seen. You've got main, and then there's an aside, and there's a section. That's how they're doing it here. All right? And then notice there's even a nav in here. Right there. And you say, hey, you said navs are at the top of the page. No, typically navs are at the top of the page. But the nav that they have in here, oh, try it again. Where is that? Okay, then it's backwards. All right. That's this stuff that's in, it's either the stuff in here, it's probably the stuff in here. All right. They don't yet have a navigation bar up there. Why? Because they talk about that in the next chapter. All right. So you're going to see that stuff added. All right. So they give you the HTML. They give you the CSS. Like I said, you now have all of these examples. If you're struggling at all in here, just download one of them. Just copy it. Make a bunch of changes. All right. Try it where it says float left, change it to float right, etc. That's how you're going to learn more than anything else, in my opinion. All right. So again, more of the CSS. And then they do the speaker page. Okay. This one's different. If you remember with the other page, this stuff was basically over here. And now look what they've done. It's still a 2-column type of format, but what they've done is they've taken the image and you have to float the text around the image. All right. And again, the columns for this page are coded as an article and as an aside. That really is irrelevant because, like I said, not everybody agrees what's an article, what's an aside, what's a section, etc. But there is some rhyme and reason to it. You can go out to w3schools.com and they tell you in there, if you, I actually did it the other day, if you Google HTML5 semantic elements W3 schools, it'll show you how they think you should be setting up main, section, aside, etc. All right. So again, they give you the HTML for it. and not a lot has changed. They just put a different CSS file in there. All right. So, how to use CSS3 to create text columns. There are some properties for doing this. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. Notice if I've got an article here and I say column count 3, that's exactly what it does. Now, one thing to think about is that I'm not saying does that look good or does that look bad. It doesn't matter. But regardless of what you think, what you want to make sure happens is when you get to a certain width for your browser, you change the column width maybe from 3 to 2, and then eventually to 1. You see what I'm saying? Because what it's going to do otherwise is it's going to literally do that, but there'll be 3 columns in an area for 1. So what's going to happen is it'll still work, you'll still be able to see it, but now it's going to be real long because it doesn't have much width, so it has to put up with it by adding to the height. All right? And if you get that, there's not really much more to say about it. Now, I don't think this is true anymore. It says, at this writing, Firefox does not support the column span property. And again, you go, well, I want to know if it does. You go out to caniuse.com, all right, and you come in here and you type in column span. And you'll notice earlier versions of Firefox don't, but the newer versions do. All right? And one thing to really kind of keep in mind, you know, if you are creating a website for someone, you really want to talk to them and say, hey, I can set it up so it'll work back to IE2, but it's going to be a lot more work, which is going to cost you a lot more money. And if they come back and say, well, how many people are using IE2? And you say 0.00003, they're probably going to say it's not an issue. Don't do it. But if you set it up, like I said here, for if you say your average user is either IE11 or Edge 92, etc., okay, you're still going to be covering probably 90+% of people. All right. Now that number I just gave you might be wrong, but the more browsers that you have to support going back, the more work you're going to have to do, all right, in order to get it to work and look the way you want it to look, etc. So here's a 2-column page with 2 articles. Actually, and there's the 2 columns with an article tag. All right. And again, I've told you this before, that, and we're almost to the end of the chapter, but to a lot of people, if you say, hey, do you like this? Do you like the way this looks? Or what do you want? I mentioned this the other day. I've done this before myself. What do you want? I don't know. Tell me what you think I want. You know, because I've had people say, when I've tried to set up sites and stuff for them, oh, I need these colors, etc. And I know they're not going to work. I know enough that, and they see it, and those don't really work very well. You know, when I was teaching and I left teaching for a year and I went back and I was a programmer analyst for an aerospace place, okay? And when I did, the first day I was there, this guy asked me to set up an order entry system for him. And I'm not even going to, you know, I'll tell you anyway. First of all, the guy loved this weird shade of purple. I don't know why, but it was ugly as hell. And I thought, the people who work with you are going to hate this. All right, but that's what he wanted. Then when customers got removed, he literally, I can't make up stuff this good. He wanted the funeral march played. Dum, dum, da, dum, dum, da, dum, da, dum, da, dum. And I told him then, you're not going to want that. Oh, I like that. I thought that's cool. He called me the next day because the people who were using it, the people working for him, hated the color and didn't want any frickin' music. And I knew that was going to happen, so I made 2 copies, one with it and one where I just used muted colors. All right. He said he knew what he wanted. No, he might have known what he wanted. He didn't know what the people working for him that were using it wanted. All right. 4 ways to position elements. And again, I'm going to probably run over. It'll probably be 5 after instead of 9. We take our break. But if we finish here, we've only got what? 1, 2, 3, about 6 pages left in this chapter. Okay. So says to position the elements on a page, you use the property shown in the first table. The position property determines the type of positioning you're using. The property can have 4 different values as shown in the second table. Now, if you do nothing, so you say, we haven't done any positioning yet, it's static. That just means stuff are placed in a normal flow, left to right, up and down. The second one, absolute, as it says, removes the element from the normal flow and it positions it on the top, bottom, right, or left of where you specify. All right, as it says, it's called absolute positioning because the element is positioned relative to the closest block that is positioned. You have to see it. It's probably not going to make a lot of sense until you see it. All right, the third one, fixed, is like absolute, but rather than being positioned relative to the containing block, an element that uses fixed positioning, as it says there, is relative to the browser window. All right. Now, you probably have seen this kind of thing where, on some sites, if they don't set it up, you have your navigation at the top. But typically, if you don't set it up to stay there, at least with some software, as you start scrolling, that navigation area will go away. It scrolls up with everything else. You typically don't want that. You want it to be fixed. All right. And the fourth one, as it says, is relative positioning. All right. As it says there, it causes an element to be positioned relative to its normal position on the flow. The other thing about this is what's called z-index. So imagine I had this. So let's just, I don't know why I have this, but here's my web page. And on my web page, I've got something here. There's a square right there. And if I go later and I go over that and I put a circle, what's going to happen is the circle is going to cover up that part of the square. Does that make sense? If I don't want that to happen, if I want the square to basically be in the foreground and the circle to be in the background, I can give the square what's called a z-index. The higher the z-index, the more towards the foreground it is. The lower the z-index, the closer to the background it is. All right? And again, this is just something that somebody set up so that you can move things in front or behind other things. As it says, it's useful if an element that you position overlaps another positioned element. Now, I'm not going to say that the example I gave you is perfect, but here are the properties for positioning elements. I'm not going to read a bit of them. But this is something, don't memorize this. But again, practice, play with it a little bit. See if you can put something on a screen and have it not move. All right? So those are the positioning properties. These are the 4 types we just mentioned. All right? And they end up how to use absolute positioning. So it says to give you a better idea, and they show it in here. So if we look, I think this is the last one in the chapter. Nope, second last one. So again, you can always go back if you desire. You can go back to wherever the heck I've got way too many of these things open here. Well, let's just do it here. If I come here and I go to Muroc 4E and I go to book examples, chapter 6, here's the absolute and fixed. All right. And I mean, don't worry about it. I'm not sure exactly even what they're exactly trying to show here. And the last one is that sidebar, all right, that they put over here. But you can at least take a look at the stuff that's in there. I will let you know, and when I gauge this thing that I'm going to have you do as a practice test, I'm going to look at the real test so you have an idea of what it is you're supposed to be doing. All right? All right, we're just about finished, so let me finish this up. In fact, I think we are finished. Yep, that's it. So when we come back from the break, it's 9:02. We will come back at 9:15. And again, we are going to go into chapter 7. After we do that and we start talking about the stuff that's in there, you'll notice ordered list, unordered list, it's all the same stuff I already showed you with upper alpha, lower alpha, etc. I'm not going to go through that again because we've already talked about it and I showed you examples. I want to just hit on the new stuff that's in here. And the big thing is, for the first time, we're going to see how to create menus. All right. So again, now it's still 9:02. Let's come back, please, at 9:15. Yes.